This episode is brought to you by our awesome friends of the podcast, Drillbit Labs. Run by co-founders Lawton Pybus and Thomas Stokes, Drillbit Labs is a leading UX research and digital strategy consulting firm. They work side by side with UX and product design leaders to elevate their digital strategy, delight their users, and outperform business goals. If you're interested in partnering with them, reach out to them via their website, drillbitlabs.com, or ping them an email at info@drillbitlabs.com. Thanks again to Lawton and Thomas and Drillbit Labs for partnering with this podcast. Now let's get into today's episode. Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of our listeners to another episode of the UXR Minds podcast. I'm Dale, and before we do start, I just want to remind all of my wonderful listeners that if you haven't done already, to give us a follow on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if you want, you can give us a rating. Hopefully you can be nice and give me a 5-star rating. If not, be honest and give a rating. That's all that matters. And also to share this on all your socials and especially on LinkedIn. So today I've got a very cool and exciting interview. I've been excited to get the both of you on. So it's actually the first duet, let's call it a duet, interview here on the UXR Minds podcast. So I have today Lawton Pybus and Thomas Stokes. So if anyone's listening that follows obviously the UXR world on LinkedIn, I'm sure you've come across them because they're very well known in the field, especially for their work in obviously in UXR, but especially more recently Drillbit Labs and the stuff that they do with that. So I'd like to welcome you both to the podcast.
Thank you, Dale. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. Happy to be the first duet. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a new emerging format for you.
I hope so. And it's the perfect duet to get started with, so I'm really happy. Okay, so let's kind of get into the nitty gritty. So maybe we start with you, Lawton. Would you like to just give maybe an introduction as to who you are and obviously what you're doing now and how you started off in what you're doing now as well?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Lawton Pybus. I am a co-founding research strategy principal at Drillbit Labs. And I guess to go back a little bit, I got my PhD in human factors, and I've worked a variety of kind of in-house as well as agency roles over the years. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that as we go.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I guess I really consider myself a research specialist. I love UX research. I love kind of a mixed methods approach, using quantitative methods, using qualitative methods. And I think that having a really full toolkit makes us much more powerful as an insights function.
Absolutely.
But again, I think those are all things we'll talk more about. So
I'm sure we will. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. I'll move on to Thomas now. So we'll get Thomas's introduction. Then, we can go into the other stuff. So Thomas.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Dale. Thomas Stokes, the other co-founding principal of UX research and digital strategy at Drillbit Labs. So today, what I do, right, is lead user research projects for a variety of clients in a couple different verticals. But as you already mentioned, the other thing that Lawton and I are pretty passionate about at Drillbit Labs is knowledge sharing with the UX community in general. So like you mentioned, most folks listening might recognize us from Depth, which is a publication that is by Drillbit Labs, kind of a bi-weekly UX research digital strategy newsletter covering various topics.
I love it, by the way. So
thanks
for your work on that.
Glad that you do. It's always good to hear from folks who actually read what they think, and you've always been a great supporter of us, so I appreciate that.
No problem.
Oh, and right, how did I get here? If we want to trace things all the way back to when I decided to get into UX, it was actually just a college course, my first semester, that we had to take as psych majors. The course was basically an exploration of careers that you could have with the psychology major. I came across an article about UX research, human-computer interaction, and human factors, and I thought that was just the bee's knees. And look, we've got a straight line from that day to here ever since. So that's kind of how I got into it, was just a lucky class project where I discovered the field.
Ah, cool, cool. And maybe, obviously, I'll open this up to you as well, Lawton. So, what was it that really like drew you to eventually, obviously, now research? But what was it that kind of, yeah, this is for me? Was it the design side of things, the human factors design, or was it more, I don't know, psychology? What was it that drew you to research?
For me, it was a combination of all of my like interests going into college. It just seemed
Mm-hmm.
like it just put them all together in the best package. My
Yeah.
favorite course in high school was psychology. I also
Okay.
really liked statistics and anything that had an applied, especially like in lab studies where you get to actually apply the things you learn.
Sure.
And so I started reading about this applied cognitive psychology where we look at the
Yeah.
way people interact with technology. And I thought that was really interesting. And I saw it in the world
Mm,
around me. So it just scratched the right itch and kind of combined all of my interests into one very specific thing that I thought I could
mm.
make a career out of.
Ah, interesting, interesting. And you, Lawton?
I would resonate a lot with what Thomas just said. I mean, I think it looked a little different. I didn't have a human factors course or anything like that in undergrad,
Mm,
but I also came from a psychology background. So,
okay.
I got into that as my major because I just loved understanding other people and what
Mm,
makes them tick and how people think about things.
mm,
And, there's not a lot you can do with a bachelor's degree in psychology. So,
mm,
I think all of us were sort of planning like, what are we going to be doing? So most people with that degree have a vague idea that they want to go into some sort of therapeutic
sure.
function, like become a psychologist. That was never really attractive to me. It was never
Mm.
at the top of my mind, which you might think is odd. But like
No, not at all.
Thomas, it was the cognitive psychology class. It was the statistics,
Mm,
the experimental methods, research design classes that I was like, oh, this is cool. We can actually systematically go about learning how
yeah.
the brain works and how people uh, respond to things. And so, yeah, I mean, literally, it was I graduated and I was looking at different subspecialties in the field of
Mm-hmm.
psychology and came across
Okay.
human factors as this one that applies all this stuff to
Mm,
the things that we interact with every day.
yeah.
You know, Oftentimes that's transportation, aviation,
Yeah.
medical devices,
Mm-hmm.
um, and a few other domains that human factors is known for, but it's really broadened out. It's kind of fed into the field of UX. So that was what got me excited about it, and that was sort of how I got my first steps into the field.
Nice, nice. That's cool. That's cool. It's always nice to hear kind of what were your passions that obviously the other guests have had on. It's interesting to see all the different journeys and routes and what was the kind of trigger to say, yeah, this is what I want to do. That's interesting. Thanks for you both for sharing that. And what was from that moment, what were your journeys kind of to where you are now, obviously, to what you're doing now at Drillbit Labs? We can get onto Drillbit Labs and how that came about later on. But just kind of the steps, okay, this is what I want to do, graduation, etc. What were your first gigs? Was it directly in the roles that you're doing now, or was there a bit of a, I don't know, a winding, snaking path towards what you're doing now? Maybe Thomas, I suppose that would be the logical
Yeah,
next
yeah.
step.
I'll go first. Right. So, like I said, I kind of decided I wanted to go into this field my first semester of college. And so
Okay.
in college, I started working actually in one of the research labs on campus with or under the study of a bunch of doctoral students.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, it just really made sense that I would go into grad school. So I mapped out all the different grad schools in the area that had a human factors program, ended up staying at NC State. I was already
Yeah.
there for undergrad, worked all the way through for grad school. And while
Mm-hmm.
I was in grad school, for me, it was never really something that I wanted to continue on to be like a professor. It was really good preparation, really good training, so I could go
Mm.
out into industry and apply my knowledge.
Yeah.
So I always thought it was really important to get that outside experience even while in grad school. So I took a
Mm.
few roles there,
Okay.
a couple internships, a couple of contracting and part-time jobs. while finishing my PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And through those roles, those were mostly in-house. I was working, for example, at Red Hat for a while.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone's familiar with that, large open source software company. And that was
Okay.
cool. I really enjoyed it. But
Mm.
I wanted to try, I was very attracted to consulting work. And so I
Mm-hmm.
started working at a firm called Willow Tree that does digital product development and strategy.
Mm.
From there, I worked at User Zoom in their professional services and consulting group, and then user testing as well. So if you look
Mm-hmm.
back on my career, it's mostly consulting, which obviously
Okay.
we can then talk about how that transitions into
Yeah.
Drillbit Labs. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. What was it about consulting that drew you towards it?
I think this is a very personal question that you can ask each person and they're going to give you a different answer.
Mm.
So I always tell others, take my answer with a grain of salt. Because
Sure.
what you experience is going to be different. And I encourage everybody
Mm-hmm.
to try out in-house and consulting roles and see
Yeah.
which one they like. But for me, there's a lot of things. I think even just personality-wise, it kind of gels with the things I enjoy. And one
Mm.
of those, just for example, in consulting, there's an explicit and an implicit part of our work.
Mm.
The explicit part is obviously, research projects, digital strategy engagements, things that we deliver to the client. We put together deliverables, and that's really fun, and I enjoy those.
Mm.
But there's also this implicit work that gets done in consulting that I really enjoy because I like teaching folks. And
Okay.
through having multiple different clients, I get the opportunity to teach them skills and know-how about UX research, digital strategy, just general user experience.
Mm-hmm.
And through working with them, I can kind of have an impact through even just that knowledge transfer of how to think about these types of problems. And that's why I actually really enjoy consulting. It's not just the specific project, but kind of
Sure.
the sub project that goes beneath the surface of instilling this knowledge in our clients. That's why I like it.
Nice, nice. That's interesting. And I'm a teacher by trade, so that is interesting to hear as well because I do love that side of things as well. And that's also what drew me to UX research as well, that the educational side of it, where even if it's in-house as well, sometimes that, depending on obviously the state of the company, if it's my previous role as a startup, let's say the maturity level of UX was quite new just due to it being a startup and most folks there having never worked with, especially with research before. So I enjoyed that side of things and kind of the satisfaction you get seeing a student's journey from my teaching background, but also someone's journey into the realization and growing within UX as well and the benefits towards it. So no, that's really cool as well. Thanks for sharing. And you, Lawton, how was your kind of early days journey towards what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, what Thomas didn't mention there was that he and I met the first day of graduate school.
That was my
So,
next question. So,
yeah, so Thomas had already been at NC State, but I came there for the Human Factors program. He and I ended up, going the whole way through together almost to the day.
okay. Wow.
So he and I had the same advisor. We were in the same cohort, a lot of the same classes. And then when we defended, it was like a day apart from each other.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's awesome.
that was where our stories combined. And yeah, similarly, I pretty much from the beginning knew that I was going to go into industry, as we called it, and work as a UX researcher in the field. And so really not uncommon for this program. I think about 90% of us ended up taking that path.
Okay.
Rather
Was there a
than,
specific
the typical, academic route of like, I'm going to go get a tenure track position and all that.
Sure.
That wasn't, that would have been the weird thing to do in our program.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to ask there, not to jump in like and butt in, but what was the reason for that? Like the most of you ended up going down the UX research route. Was it more how the course was? It was leaning towards that sort of end goal, or was it just the personality of the group, or what was that?
Yeah, I'd be curious how Thomas would answer this, but I would say two things. It's partially the nature of a human factors program. There is so much overlap with user experience.
Okay.
So it kind of lends itself to that in the first place. But I will say that that's not true of every human factors program across the country. There are those that tend to produce more academic graduates. So I think that the other part of that would just have been the culture there
Okay.
at NC State, that there was a long history of folks going down this path. And
Okay.
so, we would see older students going and getting their first UX internships. And so we were doing
Right.
similar things. Um,
Well,
Interesting.
yes, and I'll add one thing to that. With the culture, I think it's even reflected in the coursework. You can see in the program at NC State that we were a part of, there's a lot of focus on trying to get experience with
Mm-hmm.
folks at various companies in your intro course where you start studying the human technology interaction and start applying methods. You actually team up and work with a sponsor from industry. So some company comes in and sponsors the project and you work with
Right.
them. So from day one, you are kind of encouraged to work with industry sponsors. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think the culture is reflected in the program and the type of research it does. So if anyone's listening to this thinking, oh, gee, it sounds like it worked for Lawton and Thomas going to a human factors PhD program, that's one thing to pay attention to a bit is where do the graduates go after school? And then are there signs in the coursework that they are actively encouraging you to seek applied projects with
Mm.
non-university sponsors?
Okay. Okay. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Cool. Thanks for that, Thomas. I didn't want to interrupt you, Lawton. I don't know if you'd finished your little journey intro.
yeah, I mean, I guess after graduate school is a very similar story to Thomas, that I started off with a consulting gig. I worked at an agency,
Hmm.
really a UX research agency, and all we did was research projects for different customers.
Right.
And to kind of piggyback on what Thomas said about what's to like about that, um, you know, it was for me at that time, it was pretty much all research.
Hmm.
There wasn't a whole lot of building tight, long-lasting relationships with stakeholders. I mean, there were repeat clients, and
Hmm.
obviously you want to maintain those relationships with stakeholders, but there's a lot less emphasis on that, because once they've engaged with you and sort of purchased a project with you, like, they're bought in. You don't have to
Yeah.
persuade them of the value of UX research. So it
Absolutely.
was a lot of just doing research, and I progressed really quickly. I was able
Okay.
to master a lot of different methods, build on what I'd learned in graduate school,
Mm.
and really apply this approach in a lot of different uh, verticals, a lot of different
Hmm.
industries. So one week I'd be
Sure.
working with a social media company. The next week I'd be working with, uh, you know, telecommunications.
Yeah.
And the context changes. You need
Yeah.
to recruit different participants as representative
Hmm.
users. Some of the specific business challenges might look a little different,
Hmm.
but it was really cool for me to see how the context effect changes what we do. And I felt
Yeah.
like getting those experiences were really valuable for me at that
Mm.
time. And I still enjoy that aspect of consulting.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say that I think being exposed to all these different types of fields and industries can give you different minds, like learn different mindsets of users and, like you said, different contexts and things. And I suppose early on in your career, that's really beneficial for later on. If you ever do end up in the house, maybe you already have some background in dealing with that sort of industry and the challenges and business challenges in that industry. So that's really interesting. So maybe now moving forward. Okay, no, I want to backtrack on that. Maybe I'll cut that bit out. I just wanted to ask now a question based on so how long ago was all of this? I don't want to give your ages away, but just in terms of context and maybe the changes in the industry, how long ago was this?
Or how long ago was it that we were like in grad
Yeah,
school and all that?
yeah, that kind of obviously when you started like your early consultancy roles, etc.
2017 was it that we would have really broken out and started
Yeah,
consulting and all that?
yeah. My first internship was in 2018, and we started
Okay.
graduate school. It's been over 10 years now.
Okay, wow. Okay, so yeah, I won't ask your ages, don't worry. No, it's just interesting in terms of maybe from your viewpoints, how the industry has changed, maybe from when you entered the field. Because I imagine I came across, let's say, UX research 2020, I would say I started, no, 2019, just before the pandemic, I kind of came across UXR. And so, and I've seen like a lot of changes, even obviously the pandemic, all of like changed everything as well and mixed things up a bit. From your viewpoints, what are the biggest changes you've seen, and maybe the challenges for someone who's entering the field now compared to when you were entering the field yourselves back then? Whoever has the first thoughts can can go ahead, not to put you on the spot.
Let's say getting me in the mindset of thinking about years and years ago. One of the biggest changes that comes to mind is we've really grown up a little bit as a field in terms of specialization.
Mm,
And I remember even in graduate school, I was like, I'm really drawn to this research stuff. The research is where I want my focus to be. But there weren't as many research positions, and it was a lot more, kind of generalists at the time.
mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
there was even kind of a push like on social media, like, oh, we're looking for unicorns, we're looking for UX unicorns. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's not as common these days. I feel like
Okay.
specialization is generally accepted to be a good thing. There are still
Mm,
generalists in certain circumstances, like
yeah.
early stage startups, but
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, if you're a research specialist, you can do that.
Okay. Interesting. Do you agree, Thomas? Well, I imagine you agree, but any other any other viewpoints?
Yeah, I think for one reason or another, back then I heard folks tell me to develop more skills in design or to
Mm.
start learning how to code when really, I have an awareness of coding and languages. I have an appreciation for and can articulate, but can't produce the
Okay.
great designs that designers would. But, it was never the case that like I needed to, you know, be all three of those things, a designer, a researcher, and a
Yeah.
developer. So
Mm-hmm.
that advice ended up not necessarily being the best. But obviously, we could talk about how whenever someone's maybe leaving school or changing careers and starting in UX, the general market conditions are going to be different and change
Mm.
their experiences.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of discussion right now about how it's a difficult market and how there's not
Mm.
really that many jobs for the number of people looking at them. And that's certainly true. I think you've got a influx of folks who have joined the industry over the past several years. I think we had
Mm.
an estimate that um, something like 40-ish% of people in UX research started since 2020, and
Okay.
that's a large influx of folks as
Yeah.
well. At the same time, a
I'll
lot
be
of
in there as
roles
well.
had been eliminated, right? So there's a lot of
Yeah.
folks looking for relatively few positions. So I'm sure
Mm.
anyone actively out there trying to get started right now might feel a bit discouraged, but I mean, I think we've got to hold out a bit of hope that that is a cyclic thing that's in part seasonal and we'd see it rebound.
Mm.
So, and generally, I think that is true. I think there is a strong future for the UX field and that we will see kind of the job market rebound a bit. I think depending on the source you look at, it already has a little, but we're definitely still growing. We'll see if recent events, I'm not sure when we'll go live with this one, Dale, but there's been, like rate cuts in the US, for example, recently. That might loosen up the market a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was actually about to say, that I suppose there has been a small rebound in terms. I've seen more job postings specific for UX research in the past, I would say in the past 3 months, 4 months, I would say. But yeah, I think they have been coupled with layoffs, which maybe has created even more of an imbalance, because you've got like a high influx of layoffs or people coming from layoffs looking, which probably doesn't really compensate for the amount of jobs that have gone live. So yeah, hopefully in the next year or so, the layoffs will reduce and the positions will continue growing. No, I was just interested to see kind of your viewpoints and perspectives based on, obviously, when you guys enter the field to now, because we have a lot of listeners that I know are entering the field now. So that can be a bit of a worry if you are entering the field and you see like tons of other people also open to work, especially on LinkedIn. It can be a bit disheartening. So yeah, that was just a question to open that one up. So moving forward now, maybe more towards Drillbit Labs. Obviously, I've found out that you guys like or loved consulting. So I imagine that was one of the reasons why eventually you ended up founding Drillbit Labs. But was there anything else to that apart from being friends and enjoying consulting?
Yeah, I think I'll add a little bit. Obviously, we both like consulting. We both know each other for a long time. And so we saw the opportunity to potentially work together. We had both struck out independently for a little while.
Okay.
Earlier this year, we were both working just as independent consultants, self-employed by ourselves. But, I knew Lawton, you were doing the same thing I was. And so we opened up a conversation. We figured, okay, we've known each other for a long time. We both enjoy this consulting thing. But also, the important addition is that I know how you think, you know how I think, and we've got a number of shared principles about how we approach research, generally the field of user experience, how we work with clients. For example, I know you value partnership a lot. You value long-standing relationships with clients where you doing good work produces great results from them, which then strengthens relationship. So I know the way that you work, the way you think about UX, and the way that you like to interact with our clients. And so it made a lot of sense to discuss, hey, should we, rather than working independently, join forces and produce something that's bigger than both of us combined, something new, which is essentially where Drillbit Labs came from.
Interesting. I think Lawton is itching to say something.
Yeah, no, I think Thomas filled in the gaps there pretty well. I mean, I think that Thomas and I were talking about this, like what would the enduring lesson here be for, someone getting into this field and sort of picking their path. And I think for us, we both found a sweet spot in this consulting model where, a lot of research teams will have a vendor for their tooling, but they may also have a research partner, right, who comes in and helps them take on different projects, or maybe they look to them for certain advanced techniques that they're not familiar with or comfortable with. And we liked filling that particular gap. So Drillbit Labs were able to do that, and it really combines our natural interests, our natural gravitation, if you will, with some of our unique skill set. And I think that, again, for someone starting out, maybe you're not going to follow our exact path, but look at where your interests and your unique skills combine, and maybe you'll be able to find kind of a special niche for you.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people have had success with that.
Yeah, that's a nice bit of advice as well, kind of tying in with what you guys have created with Drill Bit Labs for someone who is entering the field, because that might seem a long way off as well, like setting up your own consultancy or something like that. So that's nice that even early on in your career, you can kind of set a goal, like find your skill sets, even your personality, where you lean more towards, and maybe that can be your niche moving forward, even if you don't start that right away, but can be a goal to reach for one day. So no, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so we've not really discussed the elephant in the room. It was brought out, as was brought out off recording by Thomas. So Drill Bit Labs, what is it? What does it do? Maybe Thomas, you want to give it an intro?
Yeah, I'll give you the high level overview of Drillbit Labs and
Sounds
what it
good.
is that we do. So I'd say, Drillbit Labs, if we had to describe ourselves, is a UX research and strategy consulting firm. Specifically, what we do is work side by side with leaders on UX and product design teams to achieve certain outcomes. And that can be through really three different types of work. There's three things that we spend our time on. The first is obviously, as you might expect, user research projects. The main thing there is empowering those leaders to make very confident design decisions and optimize digital experiences. So that could be things like usability studies, could be things like discovery interviews, benchmarking, different survey methods like Kano, MaxDiff, Conjoint. But in addition to those research services, the two other things that we work on include live training courses as well as advisory services. So with our live training courses, we help our client teams develop in-house user research expertise. So these are like, for example, half day to day long courses that we teach about very specific topics in user research with the end goal of helping those teams develop those skills and apply them immediately right away. And then with our advising services, they're all geared towards helping those leaders enhance their UX strategy and processes. That can look a lot of different ways depending on the goals and initiatives that leaders working on, but it could be anything from improving their team structure and hiring processes.
Okay.
Or it could be something like UX metrics, measuring the business impact of UX work and calculating ROI. So it runs the gambit. But the general idea is they're advisory services that help leaders get closer to the goals and initiatives that are closest to what they're working on and move some big rocks out of the way, so to speak.
Nice. That's cool, because I had in my head that you were just focusing mainly on consulting, more of the nitty-gritty UX research studies, etc. So that's nice to get an insight on kind of the advisory side that you do, which is also super useful and highly important for various companies out there. So that's nice. And just my own personal curiosity, where did the name Drill Bit Labs come from?
Yeah, Lawton, you want to give this one?
Yeah, it's a bit of a cheeky reference to the famous quote by Theodore Levitt about the jobs to be done method. So he said, people don't want a quarter-inch drill. What they want is a quarter-inch hole, right? And of course, you can draw this out, right? The hole itself is an intermediate goal. Like what people actually want is the photo frame or the shelf on the wall or whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah.
But we're just big fans of jobs to be done as a framework to use in our particularly like discovery work and understanding needs. And for a long time, before Depth was around, there was a predecessor newsletter that we ran called the Quarter-Inch Hole. So a little bit of an homage to that as well. But yeah, just a bit of fun and a method that we love.
We just like cheeky references too, So we thought that would
so
be
why
fun.
not?
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that as well. It's just my own personal curiosity because I thought I saw the name Joe Bit Labs. I wonder where that came from. Nice. Cool. So obviously we've established that now. So where it came about, the name. What is the long-term goal? Because I imagine now at the moment it's just you two. Um, what are the aims for Joe Bit Labs? Would you like to grow? Would you like to just keep it you two in terms of consultancy, advisory, keep it like that? What are your goals and dreams and aspirations? Because you're in America, so there is an American dream. So I wonder if that fits in with with the Joe Bit Labs.
No, thank you for asking that, Dale. I don't know that we've actually gotten that question much, but
Ah,
Thomas and I do have a vision, and I think it's hard for the outside world to kind of see that at this point because it really is the two of us at this point, and anyone else that we might need to bring on for a
mm,
client. But we do hope to grow, and we hope that
mm,
we become the go-to for research in our space.
mm.
Um, and hopefully we get there sooner rather than later. I don't know. Thomas, do you have any more color to add to that?
I just have one thing that I'll add because it's not like you said, it's something that you and I talk about a lot with each other, but it's not necessarily something that we're always going out into public on the street corner and shouting at people, right? Is that in a way what we're trying to do is take user research as a practice and help people implement it and do it better. That's the whole goal, is that
Mm,
we want the impact of this company to be is that it elevates the field overall. It elevates the way that we practice user research, and that it
mm,
helps the teams we work with achieve better outcomes. It helps their organizations achieve better outcomes. It helps users in the end. Generally, everybody's happier, but through good user research practices. So
mm,
if we can meaningfully advance the field in a variety of ways, that's what we want to do. That's part of the reason why earlier when I was talking about, the type of work we do, you
mm.
can see that reflected in those three lines of work. We want to do
Yeah.
great work ourselves, so we've got research services. We want individual researchers to, upskill and get better and progress in their careers. So we have
Hmm.
those training services. And then finally, we want teams to operate better. We want to help teams as a research practice do
Mm.
better. So that's where those advisory services come in.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, I mean, if it hasn't come across, Dale, I hope that I can just say it explicitly. Like Thomas and I love this field.
Mm.
We genuinely enjoy
Yeah.
UX and UX research, and
Mm.
you know, part of the reason why we started a business is like this is stuff we talk about in our spare time. Like we believe in this, and it may be hard to see that right now for some folks, especially those trying to get in. Like, oh, I see all these
Mm.
green banners on LinkedIn, and I've been struggling to get in. Like, is it even worth my time?
Mm.
And I mean, I think what I would say, what Thomas would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is like, no, this field is important. It does serve
Mm.
a critical purpose for businesses, and that's not going
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
So part of what we want to do at Drillbit Labs is really advancing that mission of the field.
Yeah. No, that makes three of us. Even though I'm relatively new compared to you guys, like, yeah, since I've been in the field, it's, well, based on just my past and the skills I developed and finding out what my passions were. Like once I discovered UXR, I knew it was for me. And since then, yeah, I love the field. It's nice that you guys have each other to talk about this sort of stuff in your spare time. I don't have that too much because yeah, my wife listens to me, but she gets, well, she doesn't get bored, but she's like, "Oh, we got something else." So yeah, it's nice that you guys have each other to do that, and that's obviously why I set up the podcast as well, to give also a platform for guys like you to share these sorts of things and what you do, and hopefully inspire people to continue in this journey as well. Because like you say, when you see a bunch of green banners on and very few purple banners on LinkedIn, it can be disheartening, especially if it's something you really want to do and you're new to it and you feel the imposter syndrome, even if I don't like to use that word, but because everyone has it in some form or another. So but when you do enter the field, you do have maybe that on a greater scale. So it can be hard. So if listening to guys like you and obviously these resources on the podcast, it can help you keep going and finding your niche and finding your way in the field, that because it is possible, even if it is hard, to reach your goals. And that kind of just maybe leads in nicely to maybe the final part of the episode. Do you have any specific advice? Maybe it can be related to Geobit Labs and your learnings from that, or just personally from your own experiences and challenges that you've overcome. What would you like to share with people that are entering the field, have that green banner, and maybe struggling to know what to do next, or what to focus on, or what to learn? Yeah.
Well, let's just start off by
Yes.
saying they came
So
to the right place. Listening to this podcast. Good start. Sorry, I was buying time while Lawton thought of an answer.
No problem, no problem.
I mean, there's a ton we could say. One thing I will point your listeners to, Dale. So we mentioned at the top our newsletter depth. Thomas and I've been doing a lot of research again to try to advance the field, and some of
Yes.
that's been understanding what does the hiring process for UX researchers look like? What are those different phases in the cycle? What can a candidate expect? What are hiring managers looking for? Questions that everybody has. We have been investigating that. So we have some data-driven answers to that and some other questions like what's the difference between a junior and a senior and a lead and a principal, and when do you move into a management? So as far as like planning your career and getting in and getting that first role, we have a lot of good resources there. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I guess, this podcast, and then the newsletter.
I think your newsletter probably edges my podcast.
Well, but I think we've covered some of the big pieces of advice, and that's if you believe in this field, be persistent, keep trying, don't give up. I think some people, I don't want to say speak poorly of others and their motivations, but I think there's some people who are like, oh, this is a career alternative for me, and this looks attractive for one reason or another. Like I like the hours, or I like the pay, and that's fine. But if you really believe in this as we do, stick to it. And the economic environment, as Thomas said earlier, will change. So it's a matter of time. You may have to pick up a different job in the meantime to pay the bills, but if you keep working at it, I think that your persistence will pay off.
Yeah 100% agree.
One piece of advice to add to that might hopefully be an empowering message. I haven't written this anywhere yet, so this will kind of be the first time I put it out publicly. I really hope folks take it the right way. But when job seeking, so this is specifically talking to any of the listeners who are looking for a position, one of the things obviously we've seen in our research and you hear from others in discussions is one of the main pain points when interviewing for positions is a real lack of feedback after getting a round of interview, for example. You might hear, yes, you're advanced to the next stage. Yes, you got the job, or no, you're not getting the job, right? But often that
usually copy and paste templates.
Exactly. You don't get specified feedback directed towards you from the hiring manager or recruiter. And a lot of people experience this, and I agree, it would be really nice if we actually had that type of feedback, but for various reasons, you don't get that. I've seen some folks fill that absence and try to rationalize why they got one result or another. And my big advice is actually don't do that. And here's why. I'm not trying to be like, oh, you shouldn't think about that. Yeah, after you get a rejection, you're going to think about all the reasons why that's possibly true. Yeah, that happens. And you're going to be really happy if you get the job, right? But the reason why I say try not to extrapolate and come up with your reasons is that you have no idea why that final decision got reached. It could be that there was an internal candidate for that job who basically had it all wrapped up and they had to go through a formalized process. It could be nothing about you as the individual. It could just be something else. So inferring what that hiring manager, what that recruiter's thinking often distracts us from what we can do, which is always focusing on our process and on preparation. So looking at those tips about, how do you prepare for interviews? How do you prepare for scenario-based questionings? How do you maximize your chances of conveying your excellent skills via your portfolio and resume? That's where to really spend the time. Let's remember that there's a lot process-wise, input-wise that we do have control over, and let's focus on that. So I hope that's an empowering message for folks to hear that, if we focus on our process, our input, eventually, just probabilistically speaking, the end result will take care of itself and you will win that position.
Yeah. No, that I resonate with that completely. And it's nice to hear that as well, hopefully for our listeners too, because like you say, sometimes you do rationalize, oh, I did this wrong, I could have done that better. And probably maybe not 90%, but a lot of the time there are other politics going on behind the scenes as to why you weren't hired. I've been in a hiring process myself, or at least been an interviewer and been privy to conversations around candidates. And a lot of the time, like it'll be, their skills are really what we're looking for, but we've already got this candidate lined up, or that one maybe just fits the culture better. There's loads of other. So sometimes it's not even your skills or your ability, even your personality or whatever. It can be a number of different reasons that you could have done nothing about. So not to be too hard on yourself. So I really like that piece of advice, just focusing on yourself, your own processes, and eventually the rest will take care of itself. Cliche, but what I said was cliche, not what you said, Thomas. So
no, what I said is cliche.
No, it's not. It's nice to hear it, and maybe you can tie in with this podcast when you do eventually share that in written format to be remembered for years to come.
I like that.
Cool. I mean,
Lawton, go.
Pull back the curtain a little bit into Drill Bit Labs. I mean, this is something that no matter what stage of your career you're in, like you've got to remind yourself this. And like, Drill Bit Labs doesn't have a 100% win rate. So like sometimes clients go a different direction. And Thomas, the way you've said it between us is like, don't project onto a lack of feedback. Don't read into it something that's not there. What we do instead is exactly that, focusing on, did we put in the right inputs? Are we following the process right? And I don't know, it's always good to remind yourself.
Of course. And also, not to go too deep into it all, but there are also a lot of other factors that obviously hiring managers are overwhelmed with candidates, and sometimes they just have to trim just based on just sheer numbers. So they might not even really look into your portfolio, things like that. So sometimes I've done it and I do it still probably, get so hung up on your portfolio and you keep changing case studies. And sometimes you can get so much into the weeds of changing things and you kind of lose what your process is. So I think something that I always share with, people that I've spoken to that are even more inexperienced than I am, is just try to focus on your process rather than keeping chopping and changing your case studies, because then you just get lost and maybe your eventual case study doesn't even represent how you work. That I found that sometimes when I look back through my own case studies as well, it's not really how I would work on a day-to-day basis. So I think staying true to yourself is good. And like you say, Lawton, that even the biggest, most well-known companies and consultancy agencies don't win all the time. So that's just a part of life. So yeah. Cool, guys. Thank you for, hope I didn't steal your thunder there at the end, but thank you for coming onto the podcast and doing this podcast worthy enough to share your story and also share what you're doing at Drill Bit Labs. And I implore all the listeners to this podcast to check out the things that you guys do share. So if you're not following Thomas and Lawton, I highly recommend it. I love what they share and what they're doing, so I do highly recommend that. So yeah, and thanks again, guys, for coming on.
Thank you, Dale. It was a pleasure. It was really exciting to see you reach out. So
put this out there. Hopefully it's helpful to folks.
I'm sure it will be. So maybe we can get you on again in the future, because I've got some other hopefully exciting stuff lined up on the podcast. So maybe in the future, if you ever do